A single photon of ultraviolet light. One particle that left the surface of the Sun 8 minutes and 20 seconds ago and crossed 93 million miles of empty space at 186,000 miles per second is about to be absorbed by a molecule sitting in the outer layer of your skin. That photon carries 4.4 electron volts of energy. It will break one chemical bond, and within the next 48 hours, that broken bond will become a hormone that controls over 200 of your genes. Everything that follows, everything sunlight does to your blood pressure, your sleep, your mood, your bones, your immune system, begins with one photon breaking one bond. From the photon's perspective, the journey did not take 8 minutes. Special relativity says that at the speed of light, time does not pass for the traveler. The photon that is about to hit your skin experienced no duration between leaving the sun and arriving at your forearm. For it, creation and absorption were the same event. But for your molecule, the 7-dehydrocholesterol sitting in your epidermis, synthesized by your own cells and placed there specifically to receive this photon. The arrival changes everything. A bond breaks. A shade changes. A cascade begins that will reach your liver, your kidneys, your bones, your immune cells, and over 200 of your genes before it is finished. Your grandmother knew all of this. She said it differently. Go outside, get some fresh air, you look pale. But she did not need to say it often, because you were already out there. You spent your childhood in sunlight without thinking about it. You ran outside after breakfast and came back when the streetlights came on. Every mechanism in this strip was running at full capacity for the first decades of your life, and you never once thought about it because you never had to. The loss happened later. Work moved indoors. The commute moved into a car. Retirement moved to the living room. The knees made the garden harder. The people you used to walk with moved away or are gone. The advice your grandmother gave was not something you ignored as a child. It is something your life slowly made difficult to follow. And every year you spend more time indoors, the photon deficit deepens. In your skin, in your retina, in your bones, in your blood pressure, in your sleep. Here is the photochemistry. Step outside tomorrow morning and hold your forearm in the sun. Within 10 seconds, ultraviolet B photons, wavelength between 290 and 315 nanometers, penetrate the outer layers of your epidermis and reach a molecule called 7-dehydrocholesterol sitting in the membrane of your skin cells. 7-dehydrocholesterol is a cholesterol derivative. Your body synthesizes it specifically for this purpose. It sits in your skin and waits for a photon. When the UVB photon arrives, its energy is absorbed by the molecule's B ring, a hexagonal structure of carbon atoms held together by chemical bonds. The photon's 4.4 electron volts is enough to break one specific bond, the carbon 9 to carbon 10 bond. The ring opens, the molecule changes shape. It is no longer 7-dehydrocholesterol. It is now pre-vitamin D3. From here, your body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius, slowly rearranges this broken molecule over the next day or two through a process called thermal isomerization. The pre-vitamin D3 converts to cholecalciferol, vitamin D3. Your liver adds one hydroxyl group, converting it to calcidiol. Your kidneys add another, converting it to calcitriol, the active hormone. Calcitriol enters your cells, passes through the cell membrane, crosses the nuclear envelope, and binds the vitamin D receptors sitting directly on your DNA. Those receptors are transcription factors. They control which genes are read and which stay silent. Calcitriol binding activates the transcription of over 200 genes affecting calcium absorption in your gut, phosphorus regulation in your kidneys, bone mineralization across your skeleton, immune cell function in your blood, and cell growth regulation in virtually every tissue. All of this from one photon breaking one bond in one molecule in your skin. Michael Hollick, the endocrinologist at Boston University, who has spent decades studying this pathway, estimated that 10 to 15 minutes of midday sun on your arms and face produces roughly 10,000 to 20,000 international units of vitamin D3. A typical supplement pill contains 400 to 1,000 units. Your skin, given 15 minutes of sunlight, manufactures 10 to 50 times what a supplement provides. Your skin is a pharmaceutical factory. Sunlight is the raw material, and the factory has a built-in safety mechanism. Once enough pre-vitamin D3 accumulates, further UV exposure converts the excess into inert byproducts rather than more vitamin D. Your body cannot overdose on sun-produced vitamin D. It can overdose on supplements. The factory regulates itself. The pill bottle cannot. There is a latitude problem that makes this personal for anyone living north of roughly the 35th parallel, a line that runs through Memphis, Albuquerque, and Seville. Above that latitude, from roughly November through February, the sun sits low enough in the sky that UVB photons must travel through so much additional atmosphere that nearly all of them are absorbed before reaching your skin. The 7-dehydrocholesterol sits in your epidermis through the entire winter, waiting for photons that never arrive. Your vitamin D levels drop steadily from October through March, a decline documented in population studies across the Northern Hemisphere. By late winter, your stored vitamin D is at its annual minimum. Your immune surveillance is at its weakest. Your bone density loss is at its fastest. And the respiratory infection season peaks at exactly the time your photon supply runs out. This is not coincidence. It is photochemistry constrained by orbital mechanics. Hollick spent years advocating for moderate sun exposure and was removed from the dermatology department at Boston University for it. The dermatological establishment's position was absolute sun avoidance. Hollick's position, supported by the photochemistry and the population data, was that the dose matters, that moderate exposure produces essential hormones, and that the population most at risk for deficiency was the population most likely to stay indoors, people over 65. He lost professional standing for saying what the physics showed. The vitamin D deficiency epidemic among older adults, estimated at 40 to 60% of the population over 65 in northern latitudes, is the evidence his career predicted. Pigmentation adds another dimension to this that the physics makes unavoidable. Melanin, the pigment that determines skin color, absorbs UVB photons before they can reach the 7-dehydrocholesterol in the deeper layers of the epidermis. Darker skin contains more melanin and therefore requires longer sun exposure to produce the same amount of vitamin D. A person with very dark skin may need 3 to 5 times more sun exposure than a person with very light skin to synthesize the same quantity. This is not a flaw. It is an evolutionary calibration. Populations that evolved near the equator, where UVB is intense year-round, developed high melanin as protection against DNA damage. Populations that migrated to higher latitudes, where UVB is weaker, evolved lighter skin to allow the scarce photons through to the vitamin D factory. The physics match the geography. But when people with high melanin skin live at northern latitudes, which millions do, the mismatch creates a compounded deficit, less UVB available from the sky, and more melanin filtering what arrives. Vitamin D deficiency rates in dark-skinned populations at northern latitudes are significantly higher than in light-skinned populations at the same latitude. The photochemistry does not negotiate with social circumstance. It follows the physics of absorption. If you are over 65 and you spend most of your days indoors, and statistically you probably do, your pharmaceutical factory is running on a skeleton crew. The molecule is sitting in your skin, waiting. The photon it needs is outside. Go outside. That was her prescription. That was the prescription. Now, sunlight is doing something to your eyes that has nothing to do with seeing. And this second mechanism explains why you cannot sleep. Buried in your retina behind the rods and cones that give you vision are specialized cells that most people have never heard of. Intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, discovered by David Burson at Brown University in 2002. These cells contain a pigment called melanopsin, tuned specifically to blue light at a wavelength of approximately 480 nanometers. They do not contribute to your visual experience. You do not see through them. They have a completely different job. These cells send signals along a dedicated neural pathway, the retinohypothalamic tract, directly to a tiny cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons in your hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This cluster is your master circadian clock. It runs your entire 24-hour biological schedule. When cortisol rises in the morning to wake you, when body temperature peaks in the late afternoon to optimize physical performance, when digestion activates with daytime eating, when melatonin rises at night to initiate sleep. Every physiological rhythm in your body takes its timing from this cluster, and this cluster takes its timing from the light entering your eyes through melanopsin. Here is the number that makes this personal, typical indoor lighting. The light in your living room, your kitchen, your doctor's waiting room produces roughly 100 to 500 lux. The melanopsin cells in your retina need approximately 1,000 to 2,000 lux to fire at the intensity required for robust circadian entrainment. Outdoor shade, not direct sunlight, just standing under a tree on a cloudy day, produces 10,000 to 25,000 lux. Direct sunlight produces 50,000 to 100,000. The difference between indoors and outdoors is not a percentage. It is an order of magnitude. If you spend your day inside, your circadian clock is receiving 1/10 to 1/50th of the signal it needs. Sitting by a bright window helps, but glass filters much of the UV spectrum, and the light intensity, even near a window, is a fraction of outdoor levels. The melanopsin cells evolved to be calibrated by the sun. Indoor lighting is not a dim version of sunlight. It is a different category of stimulus, too weak to do what the clock requires. Without the daily morning light signal, your circadian clock drifts. It runs at approximately 24.2 hours instead of 24, a measured property of the human clock established through isolation experiments where subjects lived without time cues. 0.2 of an hour may sound trivial. Over a week, it shifts your entire sleep-wake cycle by nearly an hour and a half. Over a month, you are sleeping and waking at completely different times than your environment demands. The morning light signal resets the clock to exactly 24 hours every day, synchronizing your internal rhythm to the actual rotation of the Earth. If you are over 65 and your sleep has deteriorated, if you wake at 3 in the morning and cannot return to sleep, if you feel drowsy by 7 in the evening, if you never feel fully alert during the day, the most likely physics problem is that your circadian clock is not receiving a strong enough morning light signal to maintain its amplitude. Circadian amplitude decreases with age. The peaks flatten, the cortisol morning surge becomes shallower, the melatonin evening rise becomes weaker. The system loses definition, the way a radio signal loses clarity as you drive away from the transmitter. Morning sunlight. Even 15 minutes outside within the first hour of waking restores the signal strength. The melanopsin cells fire. The suprachiasmatic nucleus resets. The downstream hormonal cascade recalibrates. Cortisol rises at the right time. Melatonin rises at the right time. Body temperature cycles with the correct amplitude. No supplement does this. No sleeping pill adjusts your circadian clock. No drug enters your retina and resets the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Photons entering your eyes through melanopsin do. That is the only input the clock accepts. There is an additional factor that makes this harder as you age. The lens of your eye yellows over decades, a gradual accumulation of chromophores that absorb short wavelength light. By 65, your lens transmits significantly less blue light than it did at 20. The specific wavelength melanopsin needs 480 nanometers deep blue, is precisely the range your aging lens filters most aggressively. The clock signal is weakened at both ends. Less time outdoors means fewer photons arriving, and the yellowing lens means fewer of the arriving photons reach the melanopsin cells. The result is a circadian system receiving a fraction of the signal it received at 30. The sleep problems that accompany aging are not inevitable. They are, in part, a photon deficit, addressable by spending more time in bright outdoor light to compensate for the reduced transmission. Sati Ankoli, Israel, at the University of California, San Diego, documented this in clinical studies, increased bright light exposure in older adults, improved sleep efficiency, reduced nighttime awakenings, and consolidated the sleep-wake rhythm. The intervention was not a drug. It was light. Go to bed at the same time and get up with the sun. That is what she always said. She was describing circadian entrainment. She just called it common sense. Those same melanopsin cells connect to another structure in your brainstem, the RAF nuclei, where serotonin is manufactured.